So we've talked a lot about love and outrage, right? Yesterday, that was the theme. Am I right?
Yes.
This is the outrage part. This is the part where we really call it out and name it. So Luke is our timekeeper, and so we have to watch him, or he's going to stand up and tell us what's up. So I've been in this work for 32 years here, but I've worked a number of years before that. I've never seen the darkness that's surrounding us. I don't want to be a bummer, because we're going to try to figure out what to do about it, but part of taking care of this is naming it and truth-telling about it, and this is really a tough time. And it's okay to be scared. I am, at times, and it's okay to be angry, but it needs to lead to action, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So I'm just going to summarize briefly, 2 minutes, we're on the clock here, how things were when things were really moving along before this all got interrupted. A lot of what's happening in this environment is people want to go back to the 50s and the 60s. You know, I grew up in that period. I don't want to see that. That's where they're heading. But when we started in the 60s and 70s, our movement really, sort of built on the civil rights movement, the disability rights movement, the independent living, anti-war, the feminist movement. And this is a powerful movement and accomplished a lot, really put human rights and self-determination on the map, really worked hard to get people not to pathologize behavior and diagnose and institutionalize and criminalize people and force them into treatment. I mean, we've always been about that. I can't say, we in pockets and in certain times we've been more successful than others, but it's been at the heart of what we try to do. Also addressing racism, homelessness, poverty, and policing practices, and about peer-run alternatives. That's where we were going, but now the environment is changing. So I'm going to switch over to Vesper. You following the script? Okay. So 3 minutes each, folks.
So I think historically, when we look at our movement, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, but there have been historic actions that have taken place throughout our movement for the last 35 years or more. One that comes to mind for me is the Governor Jerry Brown sleep-ins, where people were occupying state government space for up to 30 days. And a lot of the actions that came out of that was really to bring visibility and awareness to the struggle of what was happening in institutions and the little people had in the community. I think right now, when we think about the Olmsted decision, which is our right to live in community desegregated from institutions, that's still relatively new. We're talking the 1990s. So continuing to fight for our way of life outside of institutions, I think right now is so critical. With the recent executive order around, particular.
Okay. Got me. You got censored. This is what happened yesterday, too. Do we have a staff person here from the Alliance?
So I guess I can't talk about the executive order, but so I think we see an impacted threat, and I think one thing that I want to really say to kind of open is that don't think about these things in isolation. So you see the ICE enforcement on the streets, removing people actively from the streets and detaining them. I can say in my hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts, right down the street from where I grew up, there was a mother, removed from her daughter, and her daughter was crying and screaming, and it was on CNN. They actually covered it, and it was a terrifying and horrible experience. And I think when we think about what has existed historically, so we talk about ugly laws or the unsightly beggar ordinances that existed in the 1970s, so not that long ago, right? Which was an attempt to remove unhoused people from the street, remove people who are deemed problematic by the administration, by the United States government largely. So I think either whether if you're viewed as not a productive member of society or you're viewed in this way, it's really that perception and that threat that we need to really speak out against. We are not disposable. We should not be treated this way. The public services that exist for us really should be truly for us and be available. Right now, when we talk about cuts to Medicaid and a lot of those pieces as well, I think it's so important to think about why are there cuts to Medicaid? Because if they cut Medicaid, those who have insurance through private insurers, there will be more of a drive towards funding the insurance industry. And it'll save in terms of tax dollars to then in turn use for things such as war, such as ICE detainment, such as a lot of the things that we see in what's often referred to as this big ugly bill or the big beautiful bill that you may have heard of. So I think right now, in another panel we were talking about a potential government shutdown. Right now, that potential government shutdown is about that bill in particular. And it really comes down to healthcare, immigrant rights, and a lot of the things that we'll talk about on this panel.
So, Leah, you should introduce yourself before you speak.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So, Vesper Moore, I'm a mental health and disability rights activist. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the KIVA Centers, based in Massachusetts. I am also on the board for the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. This is such an important passion, and I think I always look forward to this conference, so it's great to see you all and great to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Harris, and I actually live in Reston, Virginia. And I am a second-generation psychiatric survivor. I am a journalist. I'm an activist, disability justice, psychiatric abolition. And I just really want to kind of talk from my own perspective as a second-generation psychiatric survivor, right? Kind of looking at, I'm going to give my age away, but 50 years of our history. I came into this movement when I was 25 years old, so I've had sort of 25 years of perspective looking at this and being a part of it, in addition to my lived experience. And I just kind of want to bring in a piece from our history that I think could maybe illuminate some things for us in the present. And Vesper's been so much a part of helping to keep this history alive, but I want to refer us to the Madness Network News fall 1985 issue, which you all can find on the internet, and highly, highly encourage all of us who are interested to revisit that issue, because that was 40 years ago. It was before my time, so I can't speak to it, but it was a critical crossroads in our history. There was a split, right, between folks who thought maybe it's not a good idea to be collaborating with these states and these oppressive systems, and folks who thought maybe it is a good idea to collaborate. And so I think 40 years later, we need to think to ourselves, like, what were the outcomes of that, right? And I hope we can spend some time on this panel doing some of that sober reflection, because as Harvey, pointed to, we got to be able to name the problem, right? And yes, as Vesper said, these are all intersecting, interconnected issues, but what is happening right now is fascism, right? I'm not afraid to say it or name it, right? This is encroaching, spiraling fascism, and I think we have to talk about it as such in order to figure out how are we going to resist this, looking to history and looking to what are the innovations that we can create now.
Hi, everyone. Ruth Lowenkron. I'm with the Disability Justice Program at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest and in a host of New York coalitions in mental health and other disability justice spaces. I just want to do a quick two-sentence follow-up to Leah to say what's really the obvious, especially for, for us as New Yorkers. This is not something we as the disability community can think of as, oh my God, the Trump administration, this is something new and horrible. We are seeing the same kind of horrible regressiveness back to the 50s, back to even before that, in states such as New York, where we have a progressive Democratic governor who thinks that more commitment is better for the community. So let's be, and the same thing, we see that on the West Coast with our progressive governor in California and everywhere in between. So let's just be aware, it's not just, this is what Trump is doing. And I'm not suggesting Leah was saying that, but I think we all tend to think, oh my God, fascism is here riding in on the back of Trump, but it's riding in on other backs as well. Okay, probably wasted half my time in that statement, so I'm going to be really quick. As one of the lawyers or the lawyer on the panel, I was asked to speak about litigation, and for those of you who were in the panel before this, I beg forgiveness, and I won't even say it as well as Elena Kravitz, who's the one who talked about the Willowbrook case. I think that is the best example of what litigation can do and continues to do. And so for those of you who are unaware, in the quickest of nutshells, Willowbrook was called a developmental school, AKA an institution. It was a horrific institution. It was dubbed by the real RFK as a snake pit. And even that doesn't do it justice to the degradation, to the real horrors of what we're seeing in that institution when Geraldo Rivera went undercover and opened it up to the world. And what happened in the litigation sphere, and again, litigation and lawyers by no means are out there on their own. There was the media, it's my time, I'm just finishing my sentence. So it's always everyone in the community, right? So we have the media, we have advocates, legislators, and what have you. But the lawyers were really important in the litigation. It's the still extant litigation in terms of taking care of the rights of people who were in Willowbrook. And it freed the Willowbrook residents, prisoners, got them into the community, ensured there were services in the community, and ensured there was monitoring of their lives and the ability to get services appropriate for them. Oh my God, Harvey.
Every word is important. These are warriors. Are you getting this? These are the warriors. Here's another one.
Thank you, Harvey, and thank you, everybody. I'm just so honored to be on this panel. My name is Vanessa Ramos, and I am a senior advisor at Disability Rights California. You know, what comes up for me is really the Black Panther movement, you know, that was based in mutual aid, right? That was brought up really with the notion that we know how to take care of each other. And we've bought into this lie that the government is going to take care of us. And we've invested in that. We've allowed for the overtaxation in this way and that way, trusting that they were going to be good stewards to our funds. But then we've come across and we've landed in a place where there's a co-optation of language. There's a co-optation of services, right? So we've advocated for pure services in many states. And we've dutifully given up our tax dollars. Even many of us that are on public benefits, they want to tax us too, right? So there's like a double tax, a triple tax, a city tax, a state tax, a federal tax. And when we look at how the money is then dispersed back into the community, we're finding that the services that we think we're investing in, they're not being delivered. And many of us are so exhausted that going to complain, to advocate, to demand, we oftentimes show up in a manner where we appear very dysregulated. We're not making sense. We look disheveled, we act disheveled, and then people look at our people and go, them? We're gonna listen to them? Or they'll say things like, all right, you got 3 minutes to speak, not Harvey, but not you, Harvey. Right? These public comment places where you've got 3 minutes, but the person is so tired and so exhausted and so beat down that what comes out in a way that it's easy to discredit, So I just want to highlight that the Black Panther movement is based in mutual aid. It started in the 60s. They focused on solutions. They created solutions, such as free breakfast for children, medical clinics, legal aid, and they started looking within. So I just want to highlight that when we show up unified, pushing forth those social determinants of health, right? We know what we need. How do we get very specific on what we need, and how do we start to provide that for each other, right? And then show up healthy, well fed, our kids are taken care of, and we're ready to fight, so that we're not just starting to shoot people randomly, because I'm not for that, but I am for true representation, even if it's armed. Sorry.
What rights-related items that we face today should we prioritize? 3 minutes each.
Oh shit. Can we start at that end?
Okay. That'll be followed by then what should the actions be?
Okay. No, not at all, Vanessa. All right. Right, what should we prioritize? And I think that it's a very challenging question with so much happening, and that's really part of it, right? There's so many oppressive forces from every direction that it's trying to wear us down, right? So I think one of the things I really wanted to first highlight is that while fighting for our rights should always be central, uh, there is a huge disconnect between the notion of human rights and what we're seeing on the ground, right? And I think that it's so critical to acknowledge that. There was a brand new international human rights sort of blueprint that was put out by the World Health Organization. I don't know how many of you saw that. It's the most beautiful vision. It's super informed by lived experience. It's all about rights. But where is that actually happening? Right? Where is that actually happening? And not to say we shouldn't have visions, of course we should, but we have to acknowledge what is the source of that disconnect. And again, I want to come back to fighting co-optation, right? Part of coming back to the Black Panthers, right? Why did that co-optation happen in the 70s? Because they were so effective, right? That is why the government came for them, right? That's why the government came for our movement in the 70s, because we were so effective outside of the system, right? So I think while focus on rights is huge, we love all of our legal allies, we love all of those legal approaches, that can't be enough, right? And even we got to go, I think, beyond civil rights, beyond human rights. I just, really want to share before I close and pass the mic, some thoughts from John Trudell, who was one of our MAD movement. He was a MAD ancestor, a Lakota indigenous resistance fighter with the American Indian movement, and he said, we must go beyond the arrogance of human rights. We must go beyond the ignorance of civil rights. We must step into the reality of natural rights, because all of the natural world has a right to existence, and we are only a small part of it. So, he's really talking here about privileging the earth, right? And what does it mean to privilege the earth and each other, right? So I don't know, I'm sure I'm out of time, so I will pass it.
Thank you for that, Leah. And I think with that, we were kind of talking about this earlier with kind of the cross rights piece. So when I'm talking about ICE detention, I am talking about that impacting a lot of indigenous communities too. I've been saying a lot recently that we didn't cross the border crossed us. And that's the truth of the matter. My ancestors have been here for thousands of years in Quisqueya and Boriquen in the Caribbean. So I just think the way in which this is framed is very malicious. Like particularly people being detained by ICE in Texas or California, right? Who are Mexica from Mexico, right? That was a part of Mexico at one point. There is ancestral history there. So a lot of these things that are happening directly apply. And I think it's so important to emphasize that when we're talking about ICE detention and what's happening in a lot of these neighborhoods, they're targeting states like ours. They're targeting New York, they're targeting Massachusetts, they're targeting California, they're targeting a lot of these places that have often been safe havens in some ways. So I want you to think about that, and I also want you to think about the role of institutionalization and psychiatric institutions, because historically, what I've seen also is the use of these facilities to target people on the basis of race using mental health as an excuse or a guise, like a mental health diagnosis or challenge. We've seen this with horse stealing mania against indigenous communities. We've seen this with non-compliance today, against Black, brown, and indigenous communities, and oppositional defiance disorder, right? So we see these things. They're going to be weaponized and utilized to keep the institutions full, to feed the private healthcare system and the other industries. Right now, we're seeing a position of this administration basically saying, like, we're going to give as much money to private entities that can pay for lobbying efforts to keep us in office forever, for the foreseeable future, right? So that push, it's all very much connected in that way. There's so much more I want to say about intercommunity organizing. I don't know if I have time for that, so I'll pass it on and I'll come back to that.
So I guess my crystal ball says that the areas we need to pay particular attention to are around forced commitment, both inpatient and outpatient, as we see the expansions of the abilities of states to commit on both of those fronts. And I think we need to be thinking, how do we pull that back? Are the legislative advocates or are the legislators our friends on this? You need to look at your particular state and see where the alignments are. We, for instance, when I just talked about having the governor pushing for more or ease of commitments, the legislature were our friends, and we made that work as best we can. And I think we'll talk about that more a little bit later when we talk about procedural ways of doing it. But I think pulling back on forced commitments, inpatient, outpatient, and another thing, and of course very related, is doing away with our current police-driven response to mental health crisis. Absolutely. Absolutely. We could talk about the horrific history in the country. In New York City, we've been counting in the last 9 years alone, 21 people killed at the hands of the police, merely as the police are the responders to 911. 911 is called when there's a crisis. The police come and people are shot and killed within moments. And no surprise to anyone here, the vast majority of those people are people of color. So that is an area, and again, procedurally, we'll talk about how we're doing that here and around the country. But I think that's a very much, and I think the clapping, the applause, that resonates. That is what we've got to deal with, because this community is being criminalized instead of assisted and supported in the way that we are entitled to.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to focus on our spiritual health, like whatever that means to us. And I say that because I think what I've observed is that we have the ingredients. You know, how do we become better versions of ourselves to better work with each other in truth and in power and in clarity, so that we know what our strong suit is and we stick to that? Because oftentimes we become very distracted and we want to do so many different things because we care about so many different things. For example, substance use and mental health are an area of focus that I think we need to take a close look at. I am very skilled in many areas. I want to focus my portfolio on, I have different categories, but currently it's really important that I hunker down and that I say, in substance use, I need to track what the implementation of policy is. Because on the mental health side, mental health policy with like IMDs is very different than substance use and what that looks like in the IMD setting, right? So it's these two separate systems that are forced to work together, and if we don't understand the nuances, right, others will take advantage of on how distracted we are. On the mental health front and substance use front, I believe it's very important that we create a national standard to what peer support services are. Because currently every state is operating so differently, and there's a co-optation of the term peer. So peer is not community health worker. They're both wonderful roles, but they're very different. And if we're not careful, we're not gonna know why on the back end, on the billing side, some people would much rather hire a community health worker because the reimbursement rate may be higher. But if we have a national peer support standardization where we know what we're talking about, then the fidelity to our practice will be ensured.
So I want to give you a half an hour to speak, so I'm going to break the rules and give you guys 6 minutes to say, what should we do and with whom?
Pressure is on.
Which one works? Just figuring out which mic works. Yeah, so I think, these systems are crumbling. They're collapsing. I think we got to acknowledge that they are crumbling and they're collapsing and they're not going to be sustained. That's what I see. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think these systems that we put our faith in are collapsing, and that's the reality. And I think we got to decide as individuals collectively how much more effort are we going to put into propping up collapsing systems versus creating the world we want. And I mean that in the phrase, we've been made to think that nonprofits are movements. Nonprofits are not movements. We've been made to think that this is about revolution. I don't think it is about revolution. I take my cue from elders who say that it's about evolution, right? Something has to change because every time a revolution happens, those people become the oppressors. And so thinking about how do we break these cycles that have been happening, our movement won these rights 50 years ago. And for 50 years, they've been fighting to claw them back. And we've been doing a good job with stopgaps, but we have not been able to stop this even in our own little single issue struggle that we've been working on. And that's not to blame ourselves, but I do think where it's at is autonomous organizing, right? Quiet, under the radar. It's not glamorous, and we're not going to get paid for it. But it's autonomous organizing with other oppressed groups who are working on housing, immigration, all of these other areas that we care about that are intersecting. I do think we need to really look at the effects of co-optation on our movements, on ourselves, and really question and think about that and reject as much of that as we can. We need to think outside of the advocacy areas that have been laid out for us. For 50 years, we've been told how to think, what to fight for, and I think this is the time to really start to think outside of what we've been told we can. I think we have to stop asking for housing and house our people. Whatever that takes, it might not be in ways that are conventional, right? And there's things I'm probably not going to talk about on an open stage. But if we have a commitment to housing our people, we can find ways to do that. And we're not going to wait for these systems to give it to us. Voting is one tool. We cannot put all of our efforts into voting, right? I think it's hugely important. People have died for that, but I don't think that we can put all of our efforts into that. Seeing how the gerrymandering is happening and all of that, right? I do think we need to return to our movement's original declaration of principles. Because if we don't have principles that unite us, all we are is an alternative to an oppressive system. We're the first line item that gets kicked out and the oppressive system remains, right? So I just really think about that, like rejecting single issue organizing. Stop calling ourselves alternatives, right? Like alternatives to that makes it sound like that the status quo is fine and we're another choice out there. And I think independent work is needed. I really do. Outside of these systems, outside of these nonprofits, I'm an independent person. I know that's not possible for everybody. And lastly, I think peer workers need to unionize. Like, why have peer workers not unionized to this point, right? That's part of the co-optation. The labor movement in this country has been totally decimated. And we in America, we've shown we can get real upset about Jimmy Kimmel getting yanked off the air, act with our dollars, and he gets back on. Like, Americans have shown if they're upset about something, they can make it happen, right? So I think thinking outside of what we've been told to think, really questioning what we've been told to think, and doing things under the radar. That we're not going to get credit for it, but that's what we need to be really thinking about. How can we organize autonomously outside of these systems? That's a movement. That's a movement, right? It doesn't have to be one big national unified block. It's people on the block, all over their blocks and all of their neighborhoods, right, that are already doing this work. And how can we connect with that? So I don't know, is that 6 seconds, 6 minutes? I have no concept of time. Talking about allies? Well, yeah. I mean, I think listen, we are the 99%. The 99% of Americans are our allies, right? Thinking about, right, the groups specifically that have been harmed in addition to us by these draconian policies. I'm thinking specifically of the harm reduction community. We have a ton to learn from them and how they organize and how they move, right? They have existed before funding and they will continue to exist after funding. We need to be the same. We need to be impervious to funding and we continue to roll, whether they decide to fund us or not, right? What does that look like? How can we make that happen in our states, in our counties, in our communities? So harm reduction, I think, is a huge one. Folks are going to talk about some of the other communities that have been impacted and have been over, right, decades. As Ruth said, none of this is new, but that's one alliance I think that we could really, really deepen and not to invite these people to come to our conferences. We go to their gatherings, and we don't always expect people to come to us, but how do we show up and go to where they're organizing and the work that they're doing so that we can really be in solidarity, right? You almost never hear that word in relation to our work. And I would really love to bring it back. Like, what does that mean to be in solidarity, not just to be allies?
I don't know. I think Leah said it all. I think we can head out. No, I think there's so much there, and I guess I could be a little bit more specific. There's been adapt actions from the disability movement broadly that have been, going into like Congress at a moment's notice when they're seeking to cut Medicaid or do some of these things. There have been, and I think it's exactly that. It's independent work. It's usually it's like at a moment's notice where like we're gonna do this. We're gonna show up. There's gonna be at least 100 of us, maybe 10 of us will get arrested. Usually we go down that list. We figure out what that might look like. We figure out where we are blocking the doors of this building, where we are physically disrupting the mechanism that is this administration. So I think that that's an important piece. And I think there are other conferences and spaces to kind of start to do that cross movement organizing. I think we should have more of a presence at NICL, which is the National Conference on Independent Living. I think we should have more of a presence in a lot of those disability spaces, because our civil rights are connected to disability spaces as well. I'm specifically talking about Americans with Disabilities Act, Olmstead, and these many other things. And beyond rights, it's also focusing on justice. The justice piece asks, who is not in the room? I like to think about this. So for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act does not apply to tribal nations. Tribal nations have chosen to either develop their own acts and or adapt the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because disability rights says the Americans with Disabilities Act should apply with everyone. But disability justice says, what about the sovereignty of indigenous people? What about these other groups in other movement spaces? It begs that question. It moves forward in that way. So I think cross-movement organizing is so important in that way. I think there are many different law centers that are also very much aligned with our work. The Transgender Law Center in San Francisco is a great example. I think I mentioned them yesterday. The NAACP's Legal Defense Fund is very, very aligned with our mission. So we have racial justice, gender equity, and other kind of initiatives. But again, a lot of them are nonprofits, like legal groups. They're all of these things. So I think really bringing it back to people is a very important piece. That quiet organizing, that moment's notice. We're going to show up and disrupt when we need to be here, and we need to be there when it's not too late. Thank you.
Okay, so how are we going to do it, and with whom are we going to do it? That's how I'm distilling the questions. And I spoke again, pardon for those who were in the prior workshop, but I think there are really so many ways of getting good results. And we need to ensure that we're not just tying our horse to one of them. And especially if one mode is not working, we need to move on or add other modes. And I have found, as a little side benefit, that this is what keeps us engaged in the work. So I am not a one-trick pony. I'm an attorney, but litigation is just one of the things I turn to. And I think, as I say, not only does that help, or what I'm getting to is not only does that help us become effective advocates, but it also helps keep me engaged because I'm just doing so many fun things. So I'm going to just read you from the list of things that I prepared of how we get things done. Media is huge. Harvey could tell you better than I. how effective we were when I told you that we got the legislature on our side in our struggles in the commitment space. We were running media events every week to get the media on our side, and it really became a war. The governor was responsive to us and said, "Oh my goodness," and tried to get more media on her side, and we upped our ante. So media, hugely important. Um, We've done demonstrations out in the street, and again, trying to get media coverage on those. We've done white papers. We've surveyed the community and gotten the information out. Hey, y'all in the legislature. Hey, you all in the executive. You think you know what we want. You don't. You don't ask. You don't talk with us. We're going to tell you what we want. Here's what we want. We have been involved in legislative advocacy in the mental health crisis response area, for instance. We've been successful in getting a bill put out called Daniel's Law after Daniel Prude, who was killed in Rochester. And we have well over 50 co-sponsors already. We have gotten money allocated related to that. We've had a whole task force, which some of the members of the audience have been on and done some excellent work on. So, and then I don't want to shortchange the litigation, which I referenced before, for sure. And in terms of, real quickly, the collaborators, Harvey especially wanted me to mention all of the collaborators we have reached out to in the formulation of a new coalition starting out from our commitment work in New York. It's now got an official name, the Coalition for Mental Health Equity and Justice. It's a state-based coalition, and it is not only the usual disability justice suspects, or maybe I even start smaller. It's not only the mental health advocates, it's the broader disability community, it's housing advocates, because it absolutely affects, or the housing advocates are involved in advocating for our community, and we want to work symbiotically with them. And criminal justice advocates are another huge part of that coalition. Did I miss anyone, Harvey? Families, faith leaders, well, not in that coalition per se, but definitely those are important people. So getting all those groups together, I think, is hugely important. I'm going to see if I missed anybody from my own list. Public benefits advocates is another one that we thought was really important to look to, right? Because again, something affecting our community. Let's get us all in the room. Let's get us working together.
Families are really important, right? Because they frequently are for forced treatment.
Yes, family.
We're going to take your comments and questions after she's done speaking.
Okay.
Is the Coalition for Mental Health, Equity, and Justice out of New York.
Yeah, I just want to uplift what Harvey's mentioning, family. I think the role of family has been really we've been at odds, and I think we have work to do in that space, right? I also, so what I wrote was, people, actual disabled and all people, not just us superstar disabled folks or those that we align with politically. Partners who are willing to invest time and space, funders who will allow us to do the work clear and free from polluting the waters by forcing us to behave or sound a certain way that they want us to, and I say this because oftentimes, we've been, we don't engage like philanthropy dollars or private dollars. Like we're scared or I don't know if scared is the right word, but we've been taught to just go to the government for funding. And the government, it has built systems, like Leah mentioned, that are harming us. We know what we need. We can build out the continuum of care that we know works. You know, shout out to the pets. I just pause up because many of us have four-legged family members who hold us up, who put up with our crazy shit. You know, I think right. Shout out to the pets. You know, and I say that because oftentimes, you know, these key parts, and Pat Deegan talks about personal medicine, but these key pieces to what keeps us well, we abandon in this fight because we get so excited and we want to go up there. But sometimes we got to look around, and then we got to look in here, and then we pet the cat, you know, and the cat goes, not this shit again, you know, here she goes. But yeah, just awesome. You know, Harvey, thank you for uplifting families, because I think sometimes we forget that they too are traumatized. They're coming up with things because many of them aren't sleeping. You know, they're thoroughly embarrassed, right? They're dealing with things that we oftentimes forget, and they may be coming at things from, as a mom, I'll say, if my child was struggling and I felt that there was nothing that I can do and that the system was not working, I'm not going to let a consumer-led advocacy group tell me what to do with my kid, right? I may be not sleeping, my heart may be hurting, my child is suffering. I want the suffering to stop. And when I speak to families, oftentimes they say, we would support what you're saying, but we've never seen it work because it has not been properly funded. Therefore, we must go to creative places to find the funders, to find the money to build out the world in which we want to see. What is that true continuum of care that we know works? What is a Soteria house? Shout out KIVA Center right in New Mexico, who's opening a Soteria house. You know, shout out to the Pure Respites, right? Shout out to the folks in New Jersey. I can't say your name because I have speech stuff, but shout out to the peer providers in New Jersey who have built out a true continuum of care, including peer-led housing. We need money to do that. And the government isn't always going to fund those services, but there's a lot of money out there. How do we get that money? I'll clap for myself.
Yeah, do it. Okay, so Luke, let's hear it for Luke, right? So he's going to go around. We'll take your questions or comments.
All right, I'm one of those who speaks too much, but actually I want to talk to my movement. It has been 43 years that I've worked with the direct action movement in this country, and I am appalled that this movement doesn't even know enough to stand up and say, food not bombs, cures not wars, okay? Or say, act up, or any of the big direct action groups we should be working with. And when I beg CCIT to come for 5 minutes to an ACT UP meeting to ask us to come to the police reform demonstration, they can't give me 5 minutes. It's after 5 o'clock, you know? Now, I'm a workaholic. I go to ACT UP meetings every single week online from Maine to New York because ACT UP was diagnosis almost as stigmatized as us, and they had phenomenal international success in getting services for people with HIV. And we need to learn how to do that. So we need to work with the people who made it happen. And that means Food Not Bombs is still serving food in the street in 169 nations, and we don't go to their meetings to find out how they did it when we need to provide services to our people as a mutual aid movement. We don't know the anarchists in our town. We don't know the people who are out there risking their safety to provide true harm reduction services in their community because we don't reach out. That's something that our movement needs to just own and say, we can bring that list of contacts to these circles and get ourselves hooked up and inspired and learn the skills of what is an affinity group. How do you stay safe at a direct action? How do you make sure that you're not doing things that you don't want anybody to know online? We need to know those things, and they're known things, but we don't reach out.
Thank you, Grace.
Grace, I just
You know,
wanted,
Grace used to work for the Alliance.
Grace,
Ruth
I
wants
just-
to answer for a second.
I really appreciate what you said, Grace, but I also wanted to respond. Felt a bit on the chopping block or the, defensive when you talk about CCIT, since I'm a member. Sorry if you got a response that sounded like it doesn't include you, but we absolutely want to include you and have included you, and you know how to reach out to me, so do it, please.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm from Greater Mental Health of Westchester, and I'm a recovery specialist. And I've been here over 24 hours now, and I haven't been to every workshop, but I have not heard anything about the opioid crisis in this country, and it is still killing over 100 people a day. I was a severe opiate addict for 14 years, and in 2023, over 80,000 people died from opiate-related overdoses. That was 40,000 died from car accidents in 2023. Over 82,000 from opioid overdoses. And the numbers have gone down because of harm reduction, which today is the first day I've heard about harm reduction, which makes me very happy because I'm a big fan of harm reduction. But over 100 people still die every day from opioid-related overdoses. And Purdue Pharma settled for $7.4 million. It was originally $6.5. Now they went up to $7.4 million, not of their own personal money, but in their bankruptcy settlement. And the transparency in these cities and towns is astounding. They do not have to tell us where the money is going. They could be giving themselves bonuses, paving the streets, doing whatever they want. So I think, what was today's keynote? I just saw it. What's it called? Fighting for our rights, right? This is fighting for our rights.
Yes.
Transparency, more accountability to where this money is going, how it's being spent, because mental health and addiction go hand in hand. And, if more than 100 people a day are dying in this country today, more than 100 people will die today in this country from an opiate-related overdose. There is a problem.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
I would like to respond to that, and I'd like to say thank you. And we didn't call it an opioid crisis when it was crack in black neighborhoods in the 70s. We didn't call it an opioid crisis. It became an opioid crisis when it started to impact rural neighborhoods in broadly white America. And I think that's important to name. And yes, there were settlement funds and reconciliation funds as a result of Purdue Pharmaceutical. They're going to RCOs, they're going to treatment facilities, they're going to all of these different things, right? But what I want people to think about too is fentanyl-induced disability. I want people to not think about these issues in isolation. Disability rights, disability justice applies to the recovery movement. And it's so important to know that, because the minute you need an accommodation as a result of the horrible drugs that have destroyed your community and harmed your body and harmed your family, that is when disability rights comes into play. So I wanted to say that.
Thank you. I do want to add thank you. I thank you so much. I do want to add just to uplift what you're saying and to uplift what Vesper's saying. I work in the substance use space within Disability Rights California, that the percentage of overdose deaths involving fentanyl in 15 to 24-year-olds rose from 2.7% in 2018 to 80.8% in 2023. I was just in Minnesota and I saw a cluster of people that were on fentanyl, and I didn't realize they wanted to show me, right? So I see, the bed, right? And when they look up, these were children, because there's a break in the foster care system and the sex trafficking that goes on. And to highlight what Vesper's saying is because of the stigma on drugs and the war on drugs, when the ADA was passed, it left people who use drugs out of it. So currently, you're protected by the ADA once you're receiving treatment, but not before then. And the way that that translates, yeah, only if you're not using. And the reason why this is so important is if you're in substance use treatment, oftentimes you could qualify for paratransit services or other disability related services, right? But if you need to get to fucking detox, if you need to get to treatment, you don't have a ride there. So they only protect you and the benefits only kick in once you're not using and once you're in treatment. So at Disability Rights California, one of the things our executive director, Andy Imparato, is allowing me to do in community with others is working to change the ADA to include people who use drugs, especially now that SAMHSA, yeah. So your blessings are welcome, because who knows when it's going to happen.
Can I?
In the back.
Thank you. Yes. So I want to pose a question. During the discussion, I heard the names of the Black Panthers being invoked, and also talk of using more things besides voting. Right now, I bring up the Black Panthers because the Black Panthers were influenced by lines of thinking that did not begin with. It started a lot earlier, and even in terms of a Reconstruction era, things of that nature. But they were following a line of thought presented by Malcolm X and later on thinkers like Kwame Ture and a lot of other Black thinkers of that nature, right? So when we're talking about, okay, so we have other things besides voting, what exactly are you suggesting? What exactly are you implying? Because the reason why I bring that up is because talk of revolution is nice. It's sexy. It sounds good. But the reality of that is, I don't think anybody in this room is really prepared for that. Right? There's a clip of a Killer Mike, and he's going around the room. He's asking people just basic questions. How many people here take martial arts? How many people know how to carry a gun? How many people know how to do this? How many people do that? Right? So my, once again, just to land my plane, my question is, what exactly does that look like? Because my concern is when we start talking like that, that lands in a particular community that happens to look like me. And then everybody else, they don't want to be a part of that. So when it's repping time, nobody want to rep. To quote Paul Mooney, and I'm going to censor this a little bit because I don't want to get anybody a little uncomfortable. Everybody wants to be a Negro until it's time to be a Negro. So once again,
Yeah, and
what are you implying?
so
what are you saying?
So what I'm saying, and as a solitary survivor, so it's like I may not be a Negro, but I am a woman of color. And for me, as somebody in long-term recovery who does know how to protect herself, I'm saying just that. I said what I said. I said free, like mutual aid. We need a, like we're not here to add like the over dependence on a government that has thoroughly worked against us. Those times are proving to end. And as programs are starting to shut, how do we feed each other? How do we have community refrigerators? If you own land, if you have access to electricity, how do we buy refrigerators, plug the motherfucker in, and fill them up with food? How do we pick up each other's kids? How do we fund the work that we do side by side? And those, free breakfast, that may not mean a lot to some, right? But that's because we're eating. So it's about leading from where we are. Leading from where we are. Peer support started not through permission. Leah mentioned, as someone who got clean through harm reduction, I'll tell you, the first harm reductionists, what they've done is highly illegal. It started being illegal. I got the privilege of speaking besides Dr. Ricky Blumenthal that started one of the first needle exchange programs, and people have gone to jail for these things. The reason why we have Narcan is because the harm reduction leader had access to it that he located overseas, and he started bringing it over and sharing it out, and then it got funded. So sometimes we focus outward, but I'm talking about focusing inward. And I did mention guns when I spoke, arm resistance, and I'm not encouraging people to go get fucking a gun, and I'm far from using weapons and all this ridiculous shooting that we're seeing. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying I'm going to empower myself and I'm going to protect myself at all costs, right? So if that means educating myself, right, on how to take care of myself and others, I'm going to do that. The faith-based communities, they tithe, right? I don't know that we feel comfortable investing our own dollars. If Harvey were to start through the Alliance, hey, here's a fund, right? Everyone donate $20, $100, $52, your time, right, to ensure that this peer support program happens, or that these children get fed, or that these people are coming out of institutions. Some of us may do it. We may even up the ante. And some of us, I bet you, will start looking, well, that Harvey guy.
And if I can add briefly,
Just so you know,
before we go over that, thank you.
we are fundraising for a National Recovery and Rights Center.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harvey. I want to say I understand the basis of the question, which is like, are people ready to take things to that level? And I want to say historically we've done it before. Brad Lomax, who is a part of the disability rights movement, was a Black Panther and helped the 30-day sit-in to ratify and realize Section 504, which led to the Americans with Disability Rights Act. So I think there's an interconnected history. And some of us are actively involved in these spaces. So like I'm actively involved with the American Indian movement, AIM, which I don't know if a lot of you know this, but on the Pine Ridge Reservation, there was a shoot-off with the FBI. And that was to protect our people. There is a man who served 50 years in prison. His name is Leonard Pelletier. And I know Leonard Pelletier through the Lakota People's Law Project. So I think like it's not far away. It's right here. And the history of what this has been. So when we look at what the consumer survivor, ex-patient, ex-inmate movement was, the movements for psychiatric abolition, anti-psychiatry, all of these different movements that have existed, they were means of resistance. There were mental patients' liberation fronts throughout the country. There were gay liberation fronts fighting against electroshock being used on the LGBT community, protesting outside a Bellevue hospital. History ain't far. It's right there. So I think we're just encouraging people to remember, to lean into mutual aid, which involves just supporting your community. For example, I help fill 5 community fridges a week with people in our community, and community fridges are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. just so people on the streets can access food, right? On their own terms in a self-determined way. That, just something as basic as that, mutual aid, is exactly what we're talking about. Showing up for your community, protecting each other, taking care of each other, and moving towards action when necessary.
My name is Sheila Horn. I am here from Fountain House in New York City, a community. That's our big thing. We work on everything to the community. And my comment is about that word, community. Also brought up was solidarity and unity. And my comment has to do with how that thread is a foundational thing that runs through the answer to all of these questions because we sorely lack that. And I'm going to get back to that because that's my comment. But I also don't want to neglect myself because you brought up something that's very personal to me and to a lot of people I know. In the past, having mental illness was basically kind of being criminalized, much like you also mentioned with people getting shot by the police and stuff. And that kind of works in both directions. A person made a comment earlier saying that people who use drugs should be included under the ADA and all these other things like that. But as a person with mental illness and knowing a bunch of people do, it's really kind of crappy to say that because I have mental illness, it's okay to lump me in with people who are criminals. Just because you have a mental illness or a drug problem doesn't mean you're an okay person without the drugs. You can still be a criminal who started using drugs. And when you put a vulnerable population together with a criminal vulnerable population, you get people being assaulted and raped in, psychiatric places where they should be safe. You get people even in just a meeting environment where someone will prey upon them because they think they might be able to get something. And I feel like that comment was made from a way of thinking by someone who has never been robbed of their last $5 by somebody tweaking. I don't care if you're tweaking because you have a mental illness. I care that you're stealing my last $5 and threatening my life. And that's not fair to put me with people who will harm me just because we both have mental illness. So that
Thank
aside,
you.
and taking a deep breath for a second here. Okay, back to the solidarity, the unity, and
we only have
community.
13 minutes left, and we have more people.
Okay, I'll talk as fast as I can. All of these things, we're struggling, trying to get more money, more help, more boots on the ground, more people speaking up. Those things are not just lost from our unions. A lot of it is lost from our communities. Speaking as a person who lives in the Bronx and who comes from a place, I come from a military background and various organizations where we're together all the time. So stepping out of those communities in the Bronx, I have an external viewpoint, right?
Is that the same?
People there, they throw trash on.
We have to move on. First, we have to get your mic fixed, but we have other people behind you, please. Thank you so much for your comments.
If I can respond quickly before we go to the next mic, I appreciate you saying that, like how you believe that we're very lumped with this perception of danger, and I think I've said this a lot, that when it comes to us, it's not only that we're viewed as unable, but we're viewed as dangerous, right? And there is, when we talk about this executive order, removing people from the streets on the basis of whether if they have housing or if they present as a functioning member of society, that is a level of criminalization. So it's connected in that way. So we do have to view it in that way, and decriminalizing, the idea of mental health care, community-based mental health care, instead of being put into institutions, is something that we fought for a long time. So I appreciate you naming that. And yes, funding is a huge struggle. Sustaining a lot of these things is a huge struggle. So I appreciate you raising that as well.
And I do understand the stigma and the piece behind the mental health and substance use, because I have friends who say, I'm not a dope fiend, I live with the mental health condition, and I have people that say, I'm not crazy, I'm a drug addict, right? So there is that work to do as a community in bridging us together. And if we have a national conference, Harvey, maybe that could be one of the conversations that's had, because as we bridge communities together, there's these issues that are very real. And I, my heart is with you for the attacks that you've experienced.
Hi, I'm Gail Bluebird. I go back to the 70s and civil rights in the Black movement as well. So I just want to say that I don't see us as a movement of psychiatric survivors. I see us as part of a movement for humanity. I think it's a humanity issue. And you've talked about allies. One of my fears is we're not really talking about the fear that we have. If we're watching what's going on in the country, then we know we are not the ones. Everybody is being what's the word I'm trying to say? Everybody is being oppressed. That's the word I'm looking for. Everybody on down and internationally. So, Leah, no one's free. Leah, I just want to respond to something you said, and thank you, all of you. But Leah, you said there are ways, but I can't speak of them here. I see this as something that should go on in this conference. I think the ways in which we do, the ways in which we go from here, what we do, not just looking at all of these issues that are affecting us, but for everybody. I see that we need to be out on the streets. And Leah, I just want to say one more thing, because everybody forgets that the arts are a very way of communicating, a very powerful way of illustrating our issues. So I want one of the ways to be the use of the arts. And you know what? These things make me cry. What we're doing and peer support doesn't make me cry, but what's happening in the world makes me cry. And we are one of the people that are out there with, in Florida, there's a group called Indivisible. I don't even, that I can join. And it's not that I join as a psychiatric survivor, it's that I'm joining people that are protesting what's happening to all of us. Thank you.
I just want to say that Aunt Wilbur, for 50 years, has been really she's the representative in this movement about arts, artists for change, reaching across for the arts. 50 years.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you and everyone for all of your comments. Thanks, Gail. Thanks, everybody. This is the thing I've been really listening. I mentioned John Trudell earlier, who was a poet, who was an artist, who was an activist, who melded all of those identities and who really faced consequences for his actions. So that's why I'm looking to him as one of our mad ancestors. And he said, we can't outfight them. We cannot outfight them. They are militarized. We can't outfight them. And this is from someone who did fight them, is saying we can't outfight them. We have to outthink them. We have to outthink them, right? We have to use our minds. We have to break these patterns, like I said, of how we've been taught to think and act and move. And that's why I say, like, a lot of the things I want to talk about us doing, I can't say on a stage. And that's why I agree. We got to move beyond these big once-a-year gatherings, right? And think about how do we keep this going in multiple ways. Because listen, this stuff that we all fought for, at one time it was illegal and it's being made illegal again. So there's a lot of things we can't talk about on stages. And that's why I said sometimes we got to move quietly. So that's, and we can be loud too, but we can't outfight them. We can't. They're militarized. They've been militarizing for decades. 40 years ago, John Trudell was saying we can't outfight them. Physically, we can't outfight them. And people can argue with me if you disagree, but I think that is the case. So how do we outthink them, and how do we move in ways creatively and otherwise where we can outthink them?
Hello, everybody. I just want to go back to that about overdose. Just to let you all know, we have our 4th annual overdose awareness walk this Saturday at Jones Beach on Long Island. If you want more information, go to Mental Health Association of Nassau County table on the 2nd floor. We have a flyer you can take a picture of. I don't know if we have extras with us, but definitely we look forward to seeing y'all.
You don't have anybody?
Yeah.
Oh.
Time. What time?
Oh,
I think
time.
we've been told that we are at time for the
No, no,
presentation.
no, no, no. We're going to go in 11:21, really?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to exercise my executive power. One more speaker.
All right.
I promise I'll be real quick. I just want to pose a challenge to everyone. We probably heard the phrase community is therapy, but I just want to challenge us to, I believe we should remove the term therapy, from community is, because to me, like, therapy is a medical model treatment, and it's good to be in therapy. I'm not dismissing that because I'm in therapy, but I really think it should be something along the lines of, community is recovery, community is healing, like something like that. Like, if as peers we hold on to, the non-medical model of support. So if we're going to do that, language is important, and we can choose to remove the clinical term, therapy, and just say, community is, it's essential. Community is healing, recovery, whatever. But let's move away from, if we're going to move away from the medical model, which peer support is, like, let's do it wholeheartedly and not in part.
Thank you. I want to tell you that tomorrow, first of all, the Commissioner of Mental Health is going to be here in a couple of hours. That's the time to speak up. And tomorrow we have an extra workshop slot from 11:30 to 12:45. And if you want to gather and have right before we end the conference, really go out talking about this, we'll make the time. Where? I'll figure it out. I'll announce it at dinner. Thank you so much for coming, but thank you to this. Wow, what a panel, right? Warriors.